Ayin Beis, Volume 1, page 163. We're up to chapter 86. So it's all in the middle of one discussion here. The general context is we're talking about Sefirah, Lashon, Misper. Sefirah, the word Sefirah meaning the spheres, the emanations, the divine emanations, the 10 spheres. Explaining the word, the name itself. What does the Sefirah mean? So we're all in these 9 chapters. Interpretation number 1: Sefirah, Lashon, Misper, number. So the significance of a number. So God gave us Sefirahs, and He says here, so to speak, I'm giving you 10 numbers. So it's not just a number is a nice word. It means that the number contains in it a lot of meaning. And the Rebbe Rashab is really almost like encyclopedically gathering together all the meanings of the word Misper. So just briefly, what we've covered so far is the first interpretation begins within Misper itself. The first quote was from the Pardes, and everything's very grounded here. Pardes Sharches Perik Beis, that Sefirah is Lashon Misper, because Misper this signifies, Misper connotes something that is Gvul, Mabali Gvul. That's the language here. So even though the spheres are not Bal Gvul per se, but relative to their source, they have a Gvul, and relative to their impact on us. And he explains what that means is that what does that mean relative to the source? That it reveals Atzilus. And Atzilus, the 10 spheres reveal not the Hakbalah, not so to speak the defined, substantial, distinct parameters that a number captures, which that's already in Biyah, but it's Megal, as he says, what's the Gvul? The Gvul is his Galus. It reveals something that was there concealed. It reveals the concealed power, basically, of the Keach HaGvul, the God's finite power, the divine finite power, that begins with the 10 hidden spheres, and that's what the 10 spheres of Atzilus. The door is open. That's what the 10 spheres reveal. So that aspect of the number, meaning the aspect of, as he calls it again, the language is Hegbolah Shebchinis is Galus Levad. In chapter 83. Chapter 84, he goes further with a Pardes, Erech HaKinuyim, Shar HaKinuyim rather, Erech Mispra Yomim, that more specifically this is malchus. The real primary place where Kalim emerge, where Gvul emerges, in Atzilus itself is malchus. So malchus reveals the number of the higher 9 spheres, or more specifically the 6 spheres, the Yomim El Yenim. And this is because there, before malchus, they're still in a state of, he calls it, they're not yet, even though there's 6, but the word is it's still not distinct entities. And this he begins to explain, which is what we're in the middle of, the Siddur, and Zecharav Tuvche Yaviyu, and explaining that in Siddur, the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, discuss that Zecher Rav Tuvcha refers to all the tzimtzumim, all the good that is transmitted from the highest levels to the lowest levels are all called what he calls Ribu Yuseidis. He specifically broke it down to 4 tzimtzumim, but I looked in the Siddur there again, he actually says that it's an infinite amount of tzimtzumim, but for us to be able to relate it, we're told there are 4, simply to create some type of structure. So that's Rav Tuvcha. And what's Zecher Rav Tuvcha? This is what we discussed in the last chapter. Zecher Rav Tuvcha, the remembrance, so to speak. The remembrance of these abundant or of this goodness that abounds is the actual translation of the Siddur, but of all these levels, what's the remembrance? Remembrance means that on lower levels, in Biyah, we don't really appreciate it directly, the magnitude of these numbers, their energy. What we know is, it's like someone being told what that number is. And I'll explain that in just a moment. So, he goes with an example of a person who counts. A person who counts. What is he counting? He counts an enormous number. The number he chooses here is 10 thousandths, meaning 100,000. Because Misper Otzum K'ma Yud Revavis. That's the example in the Siddur. So a person counts, he actually counts each one by one, so he appreciates in a different way. The words he uses, Yigdal Ma'ed Be'enei HaSefer. This is actual language from Siddur. This whole beginning of chapter 85 is the language of the Siddur. I actually marked it here. Yigdal Ma'ed, it increases in the value and the appreciation of what these numbers symbolize are far greater when the person actually counted one by one. That's, however, only when he counts for himself. But when he knows the number, meaning afterwards, now he knows it's 10,000, 10 times 10,000, 100,000, and then he notifies this to another person. He lets him know, I just counted 100,000 items. Think of them as quality items. So there he just says one expression, 100,000. That takes a second. As I looked in the Siddur says that one of the reasons he appreciates is because he actually spends all the time doing it. It takes hours to do it. When you say 100,000, it's like almost, someone say 100,000, what's the big thing? You just say it in one short expression. For some reason, the Rebbe Rashab doesn't quote that Shahazman that it says in the Siddur, but it doesn't matter. He definitely, because probably more reasons why we appreciate it when we actually count it. It's not just that it took time, because you tangibly relate to it.
So maybe it's self-evident it was involved now.
Okay, could be. And also he did cite that it's there, so he's assuming that someone who's learning this is going to look. But there's some things he cites. Listen, how can I tell you? I'm just telling you what it says there. He also uses something else which is very helpful in understanding this piece here. I'll tell you that in a moment. Okay. So when he tells it to someone else, now it's keser. So he calls that katnus. So even though that number 100,000 includes everything, but it's only a report. It's a number. It's a statistic on a piece of paper, or you're telling it to somebody. So he calls it. That's not misper atzmi v'amiti. I'm just being very precise here. You can't call that misper atzmi v'amiti.
Not because it's keser, because sometimes it's keser.
Yeah. Here, but bottom line is, what the person is hearing, the number, is not called misper atzmi v'amiti. Let's translate that. That means not the essential and the true number. Now it's the number, it's a correct number. It's 100,000, not 101,000, not 90,000. But it's not the atzmi and amiti of the subject matter. Because when you count yourself, you have the mahus hadavar. You're actually counting, whether it's coins or whatever it may be. I mean, this is all a mashal, an example. And when you speak, it's in a state of katnus compared to the magnitude of what that number really designates. In Siddur, which is the Alter Rebbe, he uses actually an example. He says, imagine somebody puts the 100,000 10 times, maybe that's why he says, that's why he uses 10 times 10,000. It's not just a random number. It's 10 to 10 spheres. Because he says there, imagine someone takes 10,000, let's say, coins, and puts them in a box. He says that kufsa. You have 10 boxes, each one has 10,000 coins. So when you look at the box, someone says, on the box it says 10,000. Okay, you trust it, and that's it. What are you really appreciating? You're appreciating what you're told. You don't have the atzbi amiti. You haven't sat and counted them all. So you don't really have a direct relationship and appreciation of it. You have a type of respect for it, or you believe. It's like someone gives you a check, $100,000 check. You don't start counting every dollar. There's a matter of trust. It's like a step away. It's obviously a mashal to explain how we in Biyah, in lower levels, when we appreciate the divine magnitude, we're appreciating it like you're looking at a box that they tell you there's 10 in there.
Okay.
So,
would be countless.
Yeah, exactly. So when we look at this world, for example, and we're told that fire is gvura, that water is chesed, and fire is gvura, and different objects of the world that symbolize the 10 spheres. I'm just using examples. I mean, everything in this world is. So we don't see the spheres. We see a box, which is a physical object, and we're told in it are 10 spheres. There are 10 energies, divine energies. Obviously, in this world, it's far more levels than just one box. It's many boxes. But he's basically giving an example of how something can be, the mahus of something is the essence of it, and then when we look at it, we're only seeing the outer number of it. The volume, the quantity, the externals. And in it lies, however, powerful energy. So like someone would say to you, okay, you look at a drop of water. A drop of water is hydrogen and 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, two molecules of hydrogen, 1 molecule of oxygen. You don't see anything like that. Huh? What?
Atomium.
And then behind that, they tell you that hydrogen is made up of a whole certain combination of atomic particles. Then there's subatomic particles. Then Dr. Lang will remind us that there's quantum state. Okay, with that, I don't know if it's measurable, but whatever. The point that I want to make is that what you have is that you're looking at a box, basically a package. That package has within it much more, and to really get to it, you're not really counting because you haven't seen the energy within it. If we were able to see the energy that vivifies, that energy that vitalizes existence, it would be a whole different type of appreciation of what's going on. So basically, this example of number, Sefirah, therefore, then back to Sefirah as a number, the outer level of number, in number itself, there's levels here. So as we spoke, there's number as Hakbala. Number is saying, it's 1 and not 2. It's 2, 3, 4, 5. Very distinct in entities. And then there's number as it being the power of the divine power to create a multitude. And in the example here, we're talking about is that there's the person who actually counts himself appreciates the godless of it. When you say the number and you tell it to someone else, let's say like in these cases, you say here 10 kufsas, 10 boxes, 10 pushkas, 10 containers that have within each one 10,000, that's only, it's not misperat v'amiti. That's what he's explained. It's only kriya shem belvad is a kodin davar. It's like you give something like he says, the commercial ace is similar is a kodin. Ace a davar gadol. You make a sign that here something happened. Someone comes there, you tell the history, they say in this location, with this sign, there's something big happened. There was a big battle here, a big event, and so on. You go to Har Sinai, if you can find it. And someone says, there's Matan Torah here. Yeah, you're not going to see it. You see, it's a simon. You know that here something happened. Huh? Like Beis HaMikdash, for example. We know there's a great Beis HaMikdash here. Zecher LaMikdash. So Zecher, that's the Zecher Avtufcha, that we only have a reflection of it, so to speak, a remembrance of it, meaning an echo, a step away. So that's the example he was using. Then he broke it down even further. I'm summing it up. He broke it down that when you break it even further, this is basically there's 2 levels. There's how the number is to yourself, where there it's the appreciation really of the quality of what it is that you're counting. And there's the number that focuses more on the definition of what you just counted. This is the number, 10,000, 100,000. Then he says that really there's 4 levels. Because even the person himself who counted also has both the general number and the breakdown. What's the general number? The number as it is, he knows the number before he starts counting. So he says, for the person who's counting, who actually has a relationship with the object itself, that number is actually greater than when he breaks it down. Compared to someone who never saw the objects and just knows it's being reported as a number, he's katnus compared to these details. But for the person who knows the details and he has the general number first, he says, like thought that comes before speech breaks down the details of an idea, the idea is far greater. I gave the example of Mishnah and Gemara. Mishnah is very short. You just say, here's the summary of it. So this is, as he calls, the klal kedem haprat. The summary and the klal, basically the collective number, 100,000 in this case, before you actually break it down, is even greater. He doesn't actually use the word katnus by the person himself, but clearly it's apparent from here that it's a greater state. Even by the person who's counting himself. I still go back. I'm not sure how that parenthesis can be read. I looked in the Siddur. Doesn't help. Doesn't mention it even. He said there's 2 ways to interpret it. It could be that etzem hadover is rotzen and tainug, or is the pleasure and the desire and pleasure of the person is greater in the klal. When it comes, however, to the other person who you're telling and reporting the number to, adraba misbrakel hu b'chinas katnus. The general number is a katnus, is a diminished, a reduced state compared to the details of the person actually who counted the malchus, the thing itself. And then the Rebbe Rasha basically sums it up that the purpose of this whole mashal, before we get to the nimshal, is to tell us that both in the collective number, 100,000, and when you break it down into the specific units, there's both katnus and gadlus. There's magnitude and diminished state. So number has in it these two things, magnitude and diminished state, depending what. And he says the difference is, of course, whether it's yourself or to someone else. When it comes to yourself, when the person who's actually doing the counting, both are in a state of magnitude. One sums it up as a whole, which of course is the essence of it, and the other is counting the details, but he's still counting the thing itself. Whereas the person who's hearing about it, his general number, and even if he breaks it down, he starts counting it individually. Remember, he's not counting the same object, but he breaks it down into individual numbers. They're all in the state of katnus, because it's already one step removed from the thing itself.
Unless he has complete opposite Israel, and he's so selfless that
No,
gets it.
Obviously in Aveda, when you climb the ladder, the goal is to start. Like for example, we say in davening, we say sometimes, we say there's multitude of angels. For us, it's a number. Number tells us millions sounds like a lot. It's just impressing us with the number. But we don't really appreciate what means millions.
If you saw once an angel, and then you went into it, and somebody said, go into that room, and there's 100 angels, you'll be very excited. It depends on your experience. You know what an angel is. And the guy who first says that I got a bunch of money,
right.
And then he has to count it because he doesn't know what money means.
Right,
Exactly.
okay. So Mispar HaKelil is the Klal Kedem HaPrat. For the person who himself is in a form of godless, Atzmi Yesu, that's what he says there. More than the details, even the way it is to yourself, and there's a greater pleasure in it. And the Klal after the Prat, which means the number you give somebody else, is in katnus in both these elements. And the same thing you have in the Mispar Meruba, that's Mispar HaKelil. So there's the Klal, the number, the general number, how it is to yourself, where you have the Etzem, and there's how you tell it to someone else, which is the Klal after that comes after the details, after you count it. And then there's also, in the Mispar Meruba, which means the detailed number, there's the person himself who counts it, has the thing itself, the malchus. And when it comes to another person, it's only katnus. Mispar HaKelil, Rak B'dibur Ve'en Atzmi. Yeah, and the person below who hears 100,000, yes, he starts saying 100,000 and breaks it down. It's great by him, but it's far, far diminished than from where it was in its original state, basically. Okay, that's the first half of chapter 85. I summed it up because also next chapter is very much continues. Then he goes to the nimshal. What is all this relevant to us, our discussion with the Pardes, that what Mispar is, the idea of Gvul, Kalim, and so on. So he explains briefly that the whole idea of number, which is structure, number means Hagbola, like the Pardes says several times. Mispar hu Gvul is the Lashon here. When you say a number, here the Rebbe Rashab obviously is explaining that it's not just the idea of parameters, that number also reveals something that was concealed before. So again, we're focusing, number has both elements to it. It can focus on the distinction that limits things, or it can also reveal something that is greater, that gave power to this, called gvul, called the koyach gvul of alakus, of godliness. So he says basically number is the level of kalim. Now he speaks like this. That's kalim, containers. Ikar b'chinas kalim. So if you want to put it this way, Sefirah, the word Sefirah, as the Sefirahs, is primarily Kalim. But we've learned, obviously, that there's Sefirahs also in the air, in the energy. But if you talk, relatively speaking, Kalim have the far more substantial and far more distinct. In the air, it's far more abstract. Right, that's what he says here. So the primary thing of Mispar is in Kalim. What do the containers do? The containers reveal, if we remember, we discussed at length, they reveal the chesed and gvura and the structure within the eris. So let's spell it out even more. One second. Huh? No. Then I'm talking first step. This is later. And then in Kalim itself, in Atzeret itself, the main Kalim are malchus. It goes 2 steps. It's really basically Perek Pei Gimel and Perek Pei Dalet. So again, microcosm. You have to remember that's always like this. Atzilus in general is Kalim compared to the worlds before it. But in Atzilus itself, malchus is already. Look, everything is always going is always evolving and diminishing. As the energy is diminished, the Kalim emerge. Now,
malchus in Biyah is the same way, right?
No, malchus in Atzilus is always higher than Biyah, but malchus in Atzilus is the creator.
No, in terms of malchus have Kalim.
Yeah, for sure. The Biyah is where really in malchus it's still Kalim of Atzilus. It's still called one with godliness. But it's like preparing. Think of it like this. We talked about a seed. We keep using the example. Think of a child. A new life is conceived. So in the beginning, it's one cell. It breaks. The child develops in 9 months. This is malchus going on. And the bet and imeh. Me'imeh is malchus. And then the child emerges. The emerging is already biyah. But without malchus, you're not going to get from a koyach aleida.
What he's saying is in biyah itself, malchus is also more.
Malchus Atzilus is higher than Biyah. What's it?
Malchus of Bria, malchus of Yitzira.
Oh, I'm not talking about malchus.
He's basically saying.
No, that's not even discussing it. Here he's talking about malchus of Atzilus and Biyah. Obviously, the lower you go, more malchus comes. That's simple.
In each word, malchus is representing.
Obviously, of course. 100%. But he's completely not addressing that here, because here he's talking about Atzilus. This is the spheres of Atzilus. But whatever, and from Atzilus to Biyah. Biyah is right now, for all practical purposes, a general term for creation of existence as we know it. I distinguish when I say Biyah, there's Ruchnius, Biyah, there's physical, there's Chumrius, simply to make it, because we live in the lowest of the levels. But right now, it's really a discussion of how it goes from how the divine image of Atzilus, where there's an image and a structure, but it's a divine structure, turns into the next level where it becomes a structure that has its own consciousness. That's really what we're discussing. So the 10 hidden spheres is B'chlal, there's no even structure. It's all within the God's so-called desire or God's power. Right. So before the Tzimtzum, you're talking about Esed Sfiras Hagnuzas. As we discussed, that's the root, not only of the containers, but also the energy. Remember, he emphasized, not like the Pardes. The Pardes says the 10 hidden spheres is the root of the 10 Kalim. We are learning that the 10 hidden spheres is also the root of the 10 energies. However, in Eir, it's very amorphous and has no shape. Like Shmaya Vavtalyan, teaching. Within their ideas, there's Chesed and Gvura. But it's the containers that concretize and really reveal the shape and form of the spheres, even in Eir, and even in Esed Sfiras Hagnuzas. So basically, when you say Sefirah, obviously he's going to speak later the higher levels of Sefirah as being Lashon Sipur and Lashon illumination. Bottom line, Sfiras are the carrier. Right now we're talking the number part of them. In number itself, you have the number, the containers are very tangible, 10 distinct numbers. But they also have an element that they reveal the power of, finite power, of the 10 hidden spheres that are also in the energy. But without the container, you can't really recognize it. It's not distinct. It doesn't take on, he said, it's not a Metzias Dover. So how does the Kalim do this? This is how do they do this? I mean, the truth is the end of this chapter is really a summary, just using the words mispar, of tens of chapters that he spoke earlier. How do the Kalim do this? They do this by diminishing the energy. That's what he says, so he says, by giving it a shape and form. Like he says, something the chol davar she'ena mugbul u'metzuder eina bizgalus. So it's the kelim that they reveal by giving it shape and form. Something like if you, for example, let's use the example of a projector. You project light on a screen. All you have is white light. It's the kelim, meaning if you put some type of a film with some type of shapes, it takes the energy and channels it. So Hasgalus is always through Hagbala and Seir. Like he says, Toyu. Toyu is Mata. Toyu means, like Rashi teaches in the beginning of Bereshit, Mata b'nei Adam, Toyu Dover, because it's confusing. If it's just very general, like someone says something very general, you say, what did you mean? To understand something, you have to break it into details. You have to give it some shape and form. You have to define it. So Kalim define. So we see from this that Kalim both separate and give you distinction, but they also reveal through defining. And then he says, this also means that it gives it substance. Whereas in the air, the energy doesn't have substance. So if you really summed it up, energy has no substance, has no real shape and form that we can distinguish. It's in there, but it's concealed, and it's not revealed, therefore. And Kalim changed that. So this is what Kalim do. They give it Metzias Davar, and that's what the Parda says, that Misper, numbers, Hagbolas Davar Animna, defines the parameters of the thing that's being counted, and through defining it, reveals it. So basically, definition reveals. Lack of definition remains concealed, remains beyond our experience.
It's the black part of the flame. The uptick, what is it called?
Yeah, Nehura Uchma.
Delineate.
Yeah. Now this is Kalim, so but nevertheless, on the other hand, Kalim, I'm just summing up this, Kalim still are Gilead Helam. They're just revealing. Kalim are not creating anything new. They're revealing, in Atzilus we're talking right now, they're revealing which was concealed. Like a number, exactly like a number, exactly. Even though they're Metzias Davar, even though they have distinction, but they're revealing. And that's what means that Misper is an Atzilus, in general. But then he goes on, okay, one second before we go on. So really what we have now is like this. So if someone said to you, so what is a Sefirah? Is Sefirah Kalim or Oiris? The answer is both. A Sefirah is Eir and a Keli. So how could you say Misper in Eir? The answer is, in Eir, the Misper, as we're going to discuss soon, is not really defined. It's focusing on the magnitude, like you said in the example, of the value, the real quality within this number. But if you want to talk about the intensity, you can say, one second.
Quality for magnitude?
By me, magnitude,
you use the word quantity related to magnitude more.
I'm using magnitude as quality here. If it's not a good word, let's use a different word. Let's put it this way: with a person who's actually counting, like he said, or that first klal, 100,000, someone who has it, what would you call? He's appreciating the atzmi. It's the essence. I mean, magnitude is a quantity thing.
I think so.
Usually.
Huh?
I think usually. Simple meaning, magnitude.
Okay, fine. So let's use a different word. I wouldn't either think so. I think magnitude means greatness. It depends what greatness means. It could be a lot of numbers. It could be a lot of quality. But let's put it this way. We're talking quality now. Let's use the word quality, okay? So the appreciation of the quality of it. So that's what Eir is. If you want to have the distinction, in other words, the actual distinction, that is Shamisper. So that, remember again, we talk number, there's the Hagbola of number. I'm sorry, Hagbola Shebchinis is Galus. There's the Hagbola, which is revealing the distinction, and there's the appreciation of the quality of what that number symbolizes. So, for example, if you're saying God's power to create finite, you're talking completely quality there. The fact that it's finite is incidental. It's not incidental because the kavanah is to have a structure. But it's not so much to focus on 1, 2, 3, 4. The focus is that God has this power to create a finite entity. So in essence, Sefirah Sagnuz, all it is divine power. Just like there's divine power of Bli Gvul, there's divine power of Gvul. And the Eiros carry that divine element in it. The Kalim will reveal the actual structure. And that's where these two meet. So the Kalim define the number as in structure and parameters. And the Eiros are carrying the power of Gvul of Ein Sof. That would be, as he put it before in the chapter 83, what did he say? He said like this. Yeah, that they're completely hisardus on this. Yeah, good. So Kalim do that. That's what he says here. In Biyah, the number is going to take on actual mamoshes, meaning yesh. There's going to be a consciousness. Here we're just talking about what level of revelation is going on here. The Eir reveals the 10 hidden spheres, but it's still in an amorphous state. The Kalim reveal it. Once it goes into Biyah, that's when he says later it's going to call Gvul Mamish. that's when it really becomes distinct in the sense, not just distinct. Then it becomes, so there's really, if you want to really put it, there's really 4 levels of numbers. Actually, it fits to the 4 levels he's been speaking about here. Yeah, that's good. I'm not sure what each level is, but clearly the 4 levels you'd go like this. If you look at the Sefirah Sagnuzis, there's a number there, but that's a number that is completed. Maybe that's the Mispar HaKel, the first Mispar HaKel, maybe. I'm thinking that may be the Klal before the Prat. So I'm not sure. So you talk about the 10 spheres as it is in the root before the Tzimtzum. There you're talking a number that's just simply the power of God to create finite. It's a completely divine element. You're talking after the Tzimtzum, or the Kav, or the Eris of Atzilus. Move that. The Kav, and then as it manifests in the Eris and Atzilus, now you're talking about a number that is already becoming, maybe that's the Prat after the Klal, but it's still a Lakus. I'm just saying these 4 things, maybe, I'm not sure, I'm speculating and maybe contradicting something that he may say later, but I'm just thinking of it like this. So when you have the number 100,000, like we said, as I said, 100,000 is 10 times 10,000, so it's the 10 spheres. Every sphere, think of it, has 10,000 divine energies, just for argument's sake. We only see 10. You see 10 boxes, 10 chests. So you're seeing only that. But on this, if you go to the root of it, 100,000, you say 100,000, like he says. So that's the 10 hidden spheres, has called the magnet, the ultimate atzmi, vamiti, or he calls it the etzem itself. It's a klal. It's all there. Then comes that Tzimtzum, and the energies begin to manifest in the Kav. As he said, the Kav is made up of details, but it's still not in a state that you can really count. When can you start counting them? In Atzilus. Even the Eir. But the Eir on its own is not really countable because they are visible. Because Eir does not have shape and form. So it would be like thinking of an idea of coming from Shmaya Vavtalyan, try to find the Chesed and Gvura there, you're not going to find it until it enters a container. Because the idea is still abstract. So in Atzilus, Mispar begins to emerge. But it's revealing, so the Eir reveals the quality of God's power to create the finite. The Kalim give it real distinction. So now, if you took the Prat after the Klal, by the person who's counting himself, you'd say that's Eris and Kalim of Atzilus. And the Kalim are the primary element of Mispar, because that's where you really have distinction. What about the Zulas? Who's the Zulas? The Zulas is already the level of Biyah. That's Zecher Rav Tufcha. Zecher. Now it's only a Siman Balma. Atzilus then informs through malchus of Atzilus, because the main kelim are malchus, informs Biyah, there's this number. We're telling you that there's number. Like I said, you look at the world, someone who's a Mekubal or a Chassid can see in the world everything they see. They see that's a Sefirah.
That's really a Simpson too.
Yeah, for sure. It's a diminishment. It's a diminishment. But you're telling Zecher Rav Tucha that all these levels I just described, you should know there's 10 spheres. And we have examples for it. Let's say you say, Asar B'Amoris Nivra Elam. There's many examples that when we're told, for example, that when you count Sefirah Eimer, you're connecting to 49 to 7 times 7. You experience Atzilus. You're being told a story. You're being told what the numbers are like, and you relate it like a story that's being told, not directly.
They were using sevens.
Yeah. Okay, 7 because that's emotions. Yeah, but I was thinking of something that's 100. Let's say what's a number 100? Anything the Mispar Shalom. Where do we have 100 in halacha? Oh, you were saying. Let's say by minyanim. A minyan, by brachas, right? Exactly. You have 10 people, 20 people, 30, you have 100 people. So we're told this 100, you have the Shekhinah, there's a certain dimension of quality that manifests when you have 100, when you have a number, or you have 1,000. Huh? Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So in other words, Biyah, all you have is a Zecher Rav Tufcha. You have now, you're being told a number, and this is already a level of katnus. That's what he calls katnus. It's more diminished. It's in a reduced form. So what do you really have focus? You see more the number than you see the quality of it. Because the quality is like locked inside the chest. Someone's telling you, on this chest there's 10,000 value. The value of 10,000. But what you're seeing is a number. So you're only seeing an outer dimension. It would be like we look at Elam Hazeh, physical world, and we're told that when you look at water is really Chesed of Atzilus. You're not going to see it. You can learn it. You can appreciate it. You can find examples because it's all trapped or locked in a material box. So we don't see what's inside this box. The material world is I'm just using it as an example. He doesn't really go that far. He's here. For him, it's already biyah is already the box. But to make it tangible for us, we look at the world. We're told that it's filled with Ein Eid Milvade. It's filled with the divine, but you have to look for it. Hashgacha Pratis is in there. All the energies are in there. All the Sefirahs are right here in this world working. There's nothing that exists on earth that it's not a combination of the 10 spheres. But that's like inner energy. That's like subatomic energy. Ruchni is the spiritual energy, spiritual DNA. So someone says, let's say using the example in science, DNA, cells. We don't see it, but it shapes everything. We only see the so-called outside, the tip of the iceberg, the outside impact. So this would be the two levels of Mispar Akel, Mispar Meruba, for the Zulas, meaning for the person who hears it, would be basically, I don't know the difference between the two of them. One would be, is you get the number, that would be, I guess, the general sense of it. Then you break it down in details in your life. So you get, but it's all katnus. You're not the malchus. It's not the malchus of the thing. It's already a bounce away, a step away. So now he breaks it down. He says, okay, so that's in general in Atzilus, Mispar, and primarily in Kalim. I'm summing up chapter 85 before. Then he says, but then he says, but primarily, where is Kalim? Primarily in malchus. That's right on top here. And you can't compare the Kalim higher than malchus to malchus. And he gives the example here. What's the difference? They're both Kalim. So he says the Kalim higher than malchus are just Kalim that reveal the personality of the Eir. So, like example, colors of light. Color of light don't have a function outside of revealing. They're revealing. Or the color of apples, as he gives the example. It tells you about the light, so it's more defined than the light itself. If, for example, apple didn't have a color, or you didn't see colors on the flame or on the light, you wouldn't know what it contains. So it's definitely a revelation compared to the light itself, so it's a keli. But all it is a keli that reveals the nature of the light. Whereas kelim of malchus are, even though they're still Atzilus, so they're still divine, they already have a function, like the function of creation. There's a function. He compares this to Tselem Elokim and Demus. Salam and Demus. That Tselem is the kelim of the 10 spheres, higher than the malchus, and Demus is malchus. Elokim is kelim, and Tselem Elokim is the 10 spheres, the kelim of the 10, and that. Where is the primary hakbala, the primary distinctions and parameters? That's in malchus. Because the other one is just telling you the nature of the light. So you see, if you really think about this in Aveda, again, Aveda is the key. Because Haskalah, it's a bunch of levels, and you could say, okay, this is this level. But in Aveda, you're basically talking, how do we climb the ladder from our state of being upwards? First, we begin realizing our lives are very limited. Everything is distinct. The table is not a chair. We're into material things. We're material human beings, if not worse. Chumris, coarse. Then you begin to realize that this world is just a outer layer, and within it is a keich apel benifel. V'yada kol pol ke'atapal, that we know that there is energy within it, divine energy that makes everything tick. And you climb the ladder through both hisbonenus, and through davening, and through learning, and through action, of refining our perspective and refining our behavior as a result. Because as long as a person lives on the surface level, then everything is about me. When you start realizing, I'm just translating this in practical terms. You start realizing there's these forces at work. You start climbing. How you climb from Biyah to Atzilus. And if you look at it, it all comes down to the Eir is very amorphous. The Kalim start giving it a little shape and form. Then Kalim of Atzilus, the Malchus of Atzilus gives it already distinction. In Biyah, it takes on all this course, it takes on a certain sense of self-consciousness, self-awareness, all the way to our world. So what you're doing is really climbing from Asiyah Ruchnis, Gashmis and Chumris, to Asiyah Ruchnis, to Yetzirah, to Bria, to Malchus of Atzilus, to the Kalim that are functional Kalim, then to the Kalim that just reveal an energy, till the energy itself, until the energy reveals the 10 hidden, the Kav, all the way back to the 10 hidden spheres. So if you really map this out, you're talking about a major process of how do we get from a very limited perspective of this world that's also selfish, to understanding how the whole universe exists from a divine perspective. This is called making a dira b'tachteina. But the truth is, every level is its own avodah. We're learning it quickly, like I hear malchus of Atzeret. I just want to point out that the way this should be learned, if you really learn it adaita denafshid, personally, this isn't just a mathematical equation. Where this misper belongs here and this one belongs. That's a map. At the end of the day, the purpose of this whole map is to give us a blueprint for us to climb the ladder.
And that's through davening.
Through davening and through avodah. Through davening, avodah, through also our behavior, commensurate to this. This is supposed to impact that when we leave here today, you go out in the world, you're a more sensitive human being, and you behave in a way that's more divine, more godly, in action. In other words, you take your chumriyas life and you align it somewhat to these levels there. That's too much to ask. That's the goal, just for the record. I know he doesn't say it here, but it's the underlying message in all of it. That's why I'm pointing it out. My point that I want to make is that it's not just the mathematical equations where the Eidos fit and the Kalim fit. It's a nice discussion. In other words, we're not learning here just the Lama Tes Malachos, in a sense like technically Shulchan Aruch, where everything belongs. The point of all of this is to give us a map, a way, a method. Like we say, Sulam Mutzav Arza, Reisha Megir Shemayim. We talk about the dream of Yaakov. A Sulam is tefillah. You're supposed to climb this ladder all the time. It's not just a nice image. Okay, there's a ladder somewhere that Yaakov dreamed about. This ladder is what we use to climb from earth to heaven. 4 steps in davening and so on. Well, davening is a place where this is implemented. We're learning it now. This is learning chassidus. This is supposed to be translated in davening in an emotional way where a person actually integrates it and looks into their lives and say, where does this fit in my life? And then after davening, you go to work. Hanik ben minik derecheres, Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash, Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash. Then you're supposed to bring it into action and how you interact with people and how you live your life. Chol derchecha de'eo. I just wanted to add that because sometimes it's neglected to be mentioned. So I just thought it was important to mention. Is that all right? Okay. So malchus. So really, it's about how. Let's put it this way. To put it simply, there's matter and energy, and how matter turns into energy, or how matter, I would say, acclimates itself to energy and integrates itself with energy. When I say energy, I mean Eidos and Kalim. You could say Elokus and Elam. However you want to translate it, these are words. But basically, you're taking chumrius and gashmius, making it a keli for godliness. But it's many stages, like a student and a teacher. You can't just suddenly jump and start learning the deepest things. You learn Ayin Beis, and you grow, bechamash l'mikra, you grow stage by stage. These are the stages that he's laying out.
We're learning the deepest things. Davening, I mean, we get to a seat of ruchnis,
That's fine. But something, in Asiyah Ruchni, there's this scholars of all these levels too. When two people talk about Atzilus, this one could be talking about Atzilus and Asiyah, this one could be talking about Atzilus and Bria, this one could be talking about Atzilus and Atzilus. Trust me, when we talk Atzilus, it's Atzilus the way we relate it, which is far, far lower levels. But that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. It's all about B'chol Mo'edcha. It's your Mo'ed. It's not about someone else's. You have to find your ability to go beyond yourself. That's all that matters here. This is not about comparing notes. Rab Zusha to be Zusha. It's not about being somebody else. These levels exist. Every one of us can apply these levels in our Veda 100%, each in their own way. And they shouldn't be the same. We're not in the same levels. We have different, not just comprehension-wise, what's needed in our lives. The goal of this, the real goal of a chapter, of all these chapters, is to take it and translate it into real Aveda. I'm just laying out the general way to do that. The general way really is to look at how much material you're involved in and how much spirit you're involved in. That would be a nice beginning. If you can go from 99.9% matter and leave a little percent for a little spirit, you're getting there. If you can make it a little more, that's your Eidos and Kalim. Let's put it this way. How grub is your Kali and how much Eidos is there going on? That would be the way to... In other words, how much are you focused on the number as how much I have? Like some people, what is the expression they say? Some people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. That's a perfect example of someone who knows all the numbers. They'll give you all the numbers, but they have no idea what value is. You ever meet people like that? They know everything, but they don't focus on that. It's complete focus on kamus, not eches. We all have elements of that because we're superficial, and at times we get. Then there are people who appreciate Eichus more. Just a way of translating this into personal terms. Obviously, the highest level of this is Natzilus and deep levels, but it's really giving us a language. That's what number at the end of the day is. So you look at a number, someone say number, just use the word number to let's say a focus group of 5 people. What they'll say, number. What's your initial money? Most people will say, right? And if you talk to, let's say, the Rebbe was sitting there, the Rebbe would say, Esher Sfiris. Keich HaGvul of Ein Seif. Pretty big distinction, right? You don't even need the Rebbe, you just need a chassid. A chassid would say, yeah. Whatever it is. Or someone would say, number 10, what's number 10? Someone would say, well, that's the number I chose in lottery, whatever. Or the number the horse, the racetrack. And then 10 is Esar Mamores, Esar Adibris, a minion, Esar Sfiris. In other words, number is a great word that captures. People are in numbers all day. The numbers game of knowing the. I remember my father, who was let's put it this way, very creative and genius in many levels, but came to business and numbers. So I used to tell him, I said, you has to add up and so on. So he said to me, you and your numbers. When I would take about little accounting, he would say, you and your numbers. By him, numbers was but the numbers is Elam Hazard, busy with numbers. I'm busy with quality. What are you talking numbers? That was always an interesting perspective. Well, that's a challenge. What the famous story? Who's it? Kusi Lepler? I don't know. Was the businessman Alter Rebbe's chassid? So he was making his accounting. So he made, Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, and then at the bottom, sum total. At the end of the year, Ein Eid Movadeh, he wrote, nothing but God. Yeah. So the Rebbe asked a very good question. If he's so focused on God, how did he have presence of mind to write Tishrei a number? He should have written Tishrei equals Ein Eid Movadeh, Cheshvan equals Ein Eid Movadeh. How does he suddenly have numbers? And then suddenly so the Rebbe says, if he wrote Ein Eid Movadeh on every line, he's not a businessman. Then he belongs in a kollel, in yeshiva. The key thing is that he's in business. He lives in the world, but he doesn't forget that when it comes to the sach hakel of it all, it's all a means. It's the famous Seder Hayem the Chassidus brings. Why mincha? Adam Zayir b'tfilas hamincha. Because and the was answered by tfilas mincha because it's the middle of the day. You're in work and you rise. Ma'ariv and Shachris are before the end. In other words, it's like what the Chassidus says about Yosef. Yosef was the first accountant. Mara the Chushban, he was the first Jewish accountant. And he was numbers, business. All the other others were all they were all shepherds. Yosef began as a shepherd. Why were they shepherds? Because they didn't want to be involved in the marketplace in Wall Street. They wanted to be involved in more, it's more peaceful, more serene, less the whole rush hour. Yosef, the chiddush of Yosef, that he came into biyah with his numbers, and he still maintained the integrity of Atzilus. That's what Chassidus says. They still maintained that he remembered Eglah Rufa, he remembered, and so on. That he was in Mitzrayim and Eretz Haaretz. In other words, the point is that we live in a world that's tangible, very tangible. Kamus is what counts here. It doesn't have to be that way. And our journey is from quantity into quality. Okay. So that's how so then he concludes in this chapter, and then we'll continue. So Nimtze the Ikri Abol is in Malchus. That's where the main mispah is. Higher than that, even higher than Malchus, you also have mispah. Because Atzilus in general is the slapshus of Eretz and Kalim, like I just explained. But nevertheless, higher than Malchus, it's more his galus areas. The primary thing of Eir is the focus is on mispah Eir. It's the number of Eir, which, as we're going to learn, is quality. It's really the quality of Elokus, the quality of Esesphiris. And the number in Malchus is primarily the number of Kalim, which is the quantity. Meaning more the distinction and the shape and the structure, as opposed to the quantity. And in Biyah, just for the record, Biyah adds the element that it's no longer just a Lakus. Meaning that now already there's an element of a yesh, there's a self, there's another agenda going on. Subtly. And that becomes worse and worse as it goes downward. Worse, I don't want to say worse, more stronger and more powerful.
When we say in David.
So one second. So let me just spell that out. That means, so in Atzilus you have Eris and Kalim. You have 10 spheres and you have malchus. Basically, one focuses more on the quality of the number, and there's already a number, and one focuses more on the quantity. But even the quantity is also a malchus. You're still talking about divine kedusha, right?
Kedusha, quantity is quality.
Yeah, that's another story. Yeah, that's another thing. I didn't want to mention because it's just going to confuse matters. But okay, now he's going to explain in the next chapter what means mispera eris and mispera kelim. What does that mean exactly?
What does it mean? Hashem, when you say that
And basically that's going to be quality and quantity.
Hashem, who's his power? Is that a quality or quantity?
I don't know if there's one interpretation. It depends where you're at. Look, some people need to know that God, they see power in might, and like you see someone very powerful. But like the Rebbe writes in his long letter there to his daughter that Nan Chosid, when he's davening, he says Dalef Nemiyata Emed, he thinks of a big ox that's so powerful it's about to gore him. It all depends where you are. For you that's power. That's power. For most people, for someone who's a little more sublime, power is completely quality. What's God's power? When you read in the Torah that it says, we have Kechik V'rosei Mala Elam. You hear thunder, you make a blessing. So Kechik V'rosei, like it says in it, like Ezu Gibber, who's a strong person? So the Mishnah says someone who's a strong Kevish Yitzrei. Other people say a strong man is a good wrestler, a boxer. It comes down to perspectives. Everything comes down to, you can define everything quantity or quality. In today's world, it's far easier to explain these things because once upon a time, size mattered. A bigger army was with more soldiers and more physical weapons. Today, we know you have the right weapon, and it's very small and subtle. It can create more damage than numbers. It's not a numbers thing. It's today nuclear power, chemical power. It's a whole different ball game. Because that's how it is. We live in a world that is deceptive in thinking that quantity is what matters. Just like power. What do people think is power? Power is money. We know that power is not. You don't look at it while the person is in power. You look 100 years later when he's not here. Does he still have power? Anyone with money only has power when they're there. They don't have power afterwards. We know power as Pare thought power was that the men who will rise against him. So he wanted to kill all the boys. Didn't think the girls and the women are going to challenge him. Okay, the stargazers told him. But that's basically what it is. Women and children can be subdued. The men. We all know b'schus amunah, niglu avesenu, because the women were the ones that insisted, let's have children. If it was up to the men, they would have said, let's hold up until this gzeira is over. That's what it says. So amunah, a person who has no amunah can't appreciate the power of amunah. That's why we're here as a nation, because it was loy merubchem. Atem kalam has nothing to do with quantity. The list goes on when you talk about this, but we're still, even when we know this, we're still seduced by power. That's how it is, because we live in a world where we're dependent and where we compromise because of that. Who doesn't compromise something because of so-called the quantity? Yeah, I'm just trying to say Gvura and Hashem, Gvuras Hashem. The truth is, as you said, quantity is quality and Kedusha, meaning that something that has a lot of spiritual power will also have a lot of physical power. That's why you have, for example, the Gvura of Shimshon. Initially, came from Kedusha. It came from his piety.
That scholars are physically weak.
That's another story. Listen, this is contradictions I talked about. Tuk for the gufa, chul for the nishmasa. They have the tuk for the nishmasa, chul. The bottom line is that there's a connection sometimes. It all depends on what side of it you explain. So let's continue on, chapter 86. So this last chapter is definitely a concentrated chapter. I hope I spelled it out a little more, especially in context. But that's what's going on. So Atzilus begins to give the shape and form of everything, and that takes different steps. That's Misper. Now he says, V'hine yudua, this is bottom of page 163. V'hine, now it's known, Masha, this is also from the Siddur, by the way. Masha lepomim hamisper hamuat u'b'madrega yena dafke. He's going to discuss a famous contradiction that's brought in Chassidus about where numbers, remember this is like almost an encyclopedic rendering of the idea of number. I don't think I've seen anywhere in Chassidus more elaboration on number. I even looked in some Tzedek.
The origin of numbers?
I mean, the whole nature, what a number, what means mispet in Torah. This is like serious discussion from every angle possible. She says, so there's a famous contradiction that goes like this. Sometimes when you say numbers, you say that the highest number is in the higher levels, and the lowest numbers are below. Sometimes the opposite. That the lowest numbers, the single numbers, are higher, and the multitude is lower. That's what he's going to address now. And his answer is going to be Eris and Kalim, which really means it's like apples and oranges. You're not talking about the same thing. One is talking about quality, one is talking about quantity. So initially it's a contradiction. You think, okay, thousands are, let's read it inside. So sometimes the lowest number is the highest levels. Sometimes it says achodim. Remember in Torah it goes like this. Numbers go by units, single, achodim, like an Aleph base. Aleph through Yud is singles. Yud through Kuf is tens. So it's ones, tens. Reish through Tov is hundreds. Then after hundreds comes Alofim, thousands. And then Revova, 10,000s. And some places it says, and what about numbers after that? They're all within, you always say Shishim Ribui. Everything in Torah is always in the context of Revovas. 10,000 is the top number, and everything is multiples of 10,000. So it's interesting, it's all about tens. Even though you could argue, 100,000, why is 100,000 out? It's 100, but it's all within the multiples. So it comes down to 5 levels, which sometimes correspond to Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. 5 levels. You're talking about Chidus, Asirius, Meis, Alofim, Revovos. So the question is, which is which? So some places it says, Achodim are keser, the highest level. Alofim, Revovos, malchus. So the largest number is in the lower levels. Ulapomim, and sometimes it's the other way around, Behepech, the opposite. Sharavov is keser. That the tens of thousands are in keser, and Rachodim malchus, and the units, the individuals, the singles, are in malchus. I know the thieves always like to say, give it to us in singles. I think that's connected to this. Kanovim, they say, when they do kidnapping, or they say, give it to us in singles. We don't want, because it's not easily traceable. It's such a joke. It's not what he's saying here. To lighten it up. So how do you reconcile the two? Which one is it? She says a hefreshu. The difference is beina eris v'akelim. The difference is between the energies and the containers, spirit and matter, basically. Shemetzad hakelim kol shalamayla yeser. From the perspective of the containers, that which is higher, heim b'chinas miyat yeser. It's more diminished. And in that case, in other words, then from the kelim, the lowest numbers are in keser. Keser has the fewest kelim, basically. And the more it descends and transmitted, misrabim hakelim, the kelim increase. We have to explain what this means in simple English, but let's just read inside. That's kelim. From the perspective of Eir, the opposite. The higher you go, the more intensity there is. The more I use intensity because what does ribui mean? What means many eiris? He's going to say in a moment that it means quality. And the further down it goes and it's transmitted, the light gets diminished. As we've discussed also earlier. This was discussed earlier, actually, in chapter. There's a discussion of this in chapter, I forgot which chapter. I think Nun Gimel. It's a wild guess. Let's see if I'm right. I don't think I'm right. Somewhere earlier. Okay. I think it's even earlier. Definitely on this side of the page.
That's what we learned in just a few minutes ago.
No, but he didn't say. But he's talking. But he's.
One more increase.
He didn't say. I said it. He didn't say it inside here.
Yeah, but this was not. If you make the difference.
Oh no, he just said that he's.
Malchus and then,
But that's the but that's the akdama to this. That's just a few lines before this. Yeah. Anyway, no, he's referring to something specific. He actually spoke about Yechidus. Chapter Lamadalit?
I'm looking at the keser.
Chapter Lamadalit?
I think so. So I've been looking at the keser. You looked at Lamed Gimel, right? I think it's Lamadalit.
Yeah, it is Lamadalit. Page Nun Ches. Yeah. I'm just pointing out. It's just good to see, the context. Okay. Okay, Lamadal. Fine, remember that. But now we need to read the next section, because right now, if you think about it, it's very nice words. What does this mean exactly? So what does this mean? How does this reconcile exactly? When you say there's more oiris, what does that more oiris mean? There's like physically more. What does more oiris mean? What does more mean?
Quality diminished, actually.
So the idea that, for example, there's more intensity in the source, and as let's say sunlight travels, or any light travels, it's less. More and less makes sense. In Kalim is the other way around. The closer you get to the source, the more the energy is, the less there's the less Kalim. The example given in Chassidus often for this is the body. Where there's more air, the head, is the least Kalim. The head is the smallest part of the body, but it has the most amount of power. The most the primary forces, the brain, the eyes, the ears, and so on. As you travel downward, the body gets larger, the kalim get larger, and there's less air, so to speak. Air meaning keser. I'm not talking about life force. Life is equal. The legs, which is half the body, has the least amount of. We're not talking about blood vessels and nerves. We're talking about even heat is released mostly from the head because of that, because it's like the central nervous system. Anyway, the point being is that where there's more air, there's less kalim. The higher you go, you have more air and less kalim. It's interdependent. But as he's going to explain now, the truth is, it's not a reconciliation that just to say this is air. It's actually a different meaning when you say ribui. What means more? The truth is, but there's less kalim, there's more air because there's more quality. So you really need to define is what does air and kalim mean? That's really the question here. It's not just words. You just replace the question. Instead of calling it numbers, he called it now Eris and Kalim. So Eris, the question is what this means in understanding it. So he says, now, however, you cannot compare the magnitude. I will use magnitude. The ribui in containers to the ribui, to the intensity or magnitude of the energies. The ribu is chalkus mamish. Ribu and kalim means actual distinctions. There's just simply more of it. It's like broken down into more details. When you say ribu and eris, you're not saying there's more energies. When you say that the 10,000s are in keser, you're not saying keser has 10,000s of levels. They're all united and all interconnected. In different words, he's not using this word, but it's echus and kamus. Eris is quality. So you're talking about more quality. That's what more means. More in quality. Kalim means quantity. So it's more in quantity. So it's basically the word ribui is not the same word. So when you say that there's revolvers, 10,000s in keser, you're not saying it's the same thing, 10,000s in... The contradiction is seeming like this. Where's the 10,000 belong? In keser or in malchus? So how do you reconcile that? Is it either or? The answer is Eid and Kedah. What does that mean? The answer is kamus and echus. If you're talking quality, there's more quality in keser than there is in malchus. If you're talking quantity, there's more quantity in malchus than there is in... So Eir and Keli really translate as being quantity and quality now. That's the reconciliation. It's not that it's 10,000 energies and there's the same thing with 10,000 Kelim. It's clearly complete. That's why I said apples and oranges. You're talking about two different 10,000s. So it's not like, in the physical world, is it 10,000 here or is it here? Could it be in both places? Here he's explaining that it has a different meaning.
If you added up all the...
in other words, when we say in Torah, when you say...
Come out to as much as... I don't know.
No, you can't count Eris. You could... In other words, when we say, I'll just give an example. Let's take the sun. Let's think about the sun, the earth, and a distant planet where the sun barely reaches, where it's very cold. Okay? So it's three. In the sun, someone will say to you the word 10,000. 10,000, 10,000, we'll call it watts, whatever it is. So you'd say it's for sure in the sun. And then the earth gets only a part of it, and the further you get maybe 1 watt. I'll just give you an example. Or whatever they call it, mega, however they measure the heat of the sun. So if someone asks you what is 10,000, you'll say, no, 10,000 here is signifying power, the intensity of the sun. Yes, it has a number because we give it a number. Now someone will say to you, someone will say, well, there's 10,000 on earth and 10,000 here. Here you'd say that 10,000 is actually not light, there's 10,000 details. In the sun you never find these details because it's all so intense. Just give me an example. Like, in other words, when you say something is great, the question is greatness defined by breaking it down, or is greatness defined by quality? That's basically what he's saying. The Rebbe has a sikha in Chayei Sora Tafshin in Chelik Chaf, where he brings a contradiction. He says sometimes something that's short is a higher level. Like Mishnah is Ksara, compared to the Gemara, Mishnah is more powerful. Mishnah has much more in it. The Gemara breaks it down. So in other words, more details show on a lower level. And he says sometimes it's the other way around. That La'elami Lamed Adam es Talmidei, whatever the expression is, B'derech Ksara. You should teach a student briefly. That brevity is not like Mishnah, that's the opposite. That's taking a lot of ideas and giving it in short expression. So the question is, when something is short, is it higher or lower?
We had the mashal of the Mishkan, in the Beis Hamikdash. Smaller spaces were actually holier. The larger is less.
Yeah, that's like the head and the body. Yeah, that's good. So the Rebbe explains there.
It says the source of the Gemara is the highest source of the Mishnah.
That's a different thing altogether. That's like saying the lowest of worlds is Rirud and Atzmus. We're talking now, however, in levels when you measure Kedusha and stuff like that. That's another story completely. There's always no safe in B'tchilas and Tchilas, that the lowest. Look, the Amitla Rebbe says in Teres Chaim, I think connected to this subject, that the multitude, that the Pshitas Atzmus, which is completely higher than any type of distinction, is the one that creates the infinite multitude of existence. So the ultimate is Chalkus, comes from the ultimate Achdus. But that's more its power. Not here. We're talking simply in, like I said, the teacher and the student, or levels of. We're talking about shtalshlus. Whenever you talk, by the way, something is rooted, you're talking higher than shtalshlus. You're not talking about the cosmic order as it flows. You're talking about then the lowest level. It has a connection to the highest. You're basically taking an express train. That's like jump starting it. It's not in the natural process of the cosmic order. Things work gradations. Everything works from higher to lower. There's a hierarchy. Then you climb. But you also have the power, like, a tzaddik is higher than a Baal Tshuva is higher than a tzaddik. So we always say Baal Tshuva is higher. It's not that simple. If you talk about the levels of Kedusha, a person is supposed to be a tzaddik, not a Baal Tshuva. But if you hit the bottom, you have the power to reconnect through going beyond. But that's not the way, that's not Echtev Ashiv. That's not the order of events that you're supposed to be doing. Anyway, but to go back to the Rebbe's thought, so the Rebbe answers the question like this. He says it depends. If you're talking about two different worlds, like Mishnah and Gemara, keser is higher in Mishnah. If you're talking about the same world, like taking the Gemara, which is elaborate, and a great teacher is going to explain it to a student in detail, so then the keser that he's giving the student is lower than the arichas. So it all depends, really. It's all relative. It depends what you're talking about. When we talk about, let's say, we talk about a seed. When a child is conceived, or a tree is, in the seed is all that intensity-wise, concentrated, is the whole of power that will come later. This minuscule, physically, it's nothing. Almost quantity-wise, it's like the size of a hair strand. But if you talk about someone says large, when the child comes out in the details. It all, in other words, basically explaining quantity and quality here. And both are used. The word ribui essentially is not the same ribui. That's what he's saying. Ach, ribui here and ribui here doesn't mean the same ribui. Now he's going back to the whole discussion of the pardes and numbers. Now we're going back to the example. That's why malchus is only the misper hakel. Okay, see, my example, what I said earlier was not correct. I think it's correct in a broader term. I said, what did I say? The 4 levels. I said misper hakel, the first klal before the prat, I said was like the 10 hidden spheres. The prat of the klal was the energies of Atzilus. The klal after the prat, I said, was biyah. So he's saying the klal after the prat here is malchus. Okay, fine. It's all again relative. And that's what it means that malchus is only the misper hakel, is the encompassing number. We're talking about the klal after the prat. Remember, we said someone counts. So he knows the number beforehand. That's the highest level. He breaks it down. That's the next level, but it's still godless. Then he tells the number to somebody else. He gives them a zecher. He gives them some symbol. So he says this is malchus. It's in a state of diminishment, of reduction. It's mir ta'er. When you're telling someone else the number that they have not counted, they're only getting a diminished description of this magnitude, of this great number. This is the klal that comes after the prat and it's lower than it. Like you said, this is the 3rd level. When you're telling someone that number, right? So this is malchus. The prat before this klal, when you counted yourself, remember you said someone appreciates, that's eres of Atzilus. That's the energies of Atzilus. So Atzilus, in other words, it appreciates what's inside this box, because it's actually counting one by one by one, as we discussed in the last chapter. See, here's how the mashal nimshal. Remember he said it's a misper atzmi v'amiti in the mashal, in the nimshal, eres atzmi, because it's bechinas gilim and etzem. Here you're talking about a revelation of the etzem. It's revealing the divine power of Sefirah Sagnuzis of Gvul. So someone who's really appreciating the 10 spheres from an Erev, if you were writing on the Erev Atzilus, you're not focusing on how many numbers there are and the quantity, you're focusing on the quality of Elokus. In numbers, but it's a number that's revealing, that means mispereiris. The appreciation of quality, that's what it means. The intensity of the quality. Or kanal peidik pei hey, like we said in the previous chapter 85. V'yesh gam ken b'misper hamaruba shul b'chinas katnus. And then there's also misper hamaruba b'chinas katnus. Remember, this detailed number that we just said is when you count yourself. But then when you tell the number to someone else who's on a lower level, so not only the misper hakel by him is katnus, not only his general number, but also when he starts thinking, okay, one second, you just told me there's 100,000, let me think what 100,000 is. And he starts breaking it down. His breakdown is not like the original breakdown of the one who actually counted it. So there's misper haruba also in katnus, that's the 4th level. The Hainu Agdolos HaMisper Levad canal. That's simply someone taking the number 100,000 and saying, let me appreciate what it is. All right, exactly. So in other words, it's almost like this. It's almost like a teacher who has a brilliant concept in his machshava. He breaks it down and gives it to you in very brief terms. He says to you, here's the idea. He gives it to you like in a paragraph or something. Then you go start learning it and you start appreciating this paragraph. But what you're appreciating is not the details the teacher has. You're now appreciating it as it was given to you. It's like 2 steps away. He gave you a summary and you're breaking down the summary. So your breakdown of the klal after in other words, he had a klal and a prat. Your klal and prat are far lower than his klal and prat, basically. And that's in simple terms what he's saying here. See, in the mashal it was harder to understand because numbers, as I said, what do you mean? If I'm telling you 100,000, I give you a bag, so you can count what I counted. But we're talking in gradations. It doesn't work that way. You're not counting what I'm counting. You're counting it on a lower level because it's moving downward. That's the key point that has to be added here. If you don't read that, it seems like the mashal and imshal doesn't really work. And that's what it means, the ribui hakelim. You know, when we say there's ribui is in malchus, you're talking about the ribui of kelim. So in other words, now you're talking about the ribui of the details. If you talk ribui intensity and quality, the higher levels have that. Reflects that misper. So now we have like basically two levels in misper. When you say the word number, the truth is it depends what you mean. Do you mean number of quality? Do you mean number in quantity? Now most people, you define number, they'll only define it as quantity. They won't think in terms of quality. But the Rebbe Rashab is obviously going from the root. Remember, numbers in its root did not begin with quantity. It began with malchus. God created numbers. Right, or higher even. Exactly. And all of this is still in the interpretation of misper. So that's the ribui. In your ribui hakelim the malchus yudua. Okay, before we continue, let's see. We have this down? Is it understood? Okay, yeah, I think so. So
we've got ribui in malchus, both sides, yeah, koga and ribui, this one. Both are found.
Yeah. Well, malchus takes from the Eirus of Atzeret is before malchus, the 10 higher spheres, or the 6 days, as he put it before. That is, as you count yourself, you have a kil. I guess that would be in keser. Keser would be like saying. Then it breaks it down in nine spheres into meruba, but it's to yourself, so you get the muhus. Then that transmits into malchus a sum, and then malchus breaks that down into ribui kelim, into details. So basically, zecher avtuvcha is malchus. The truth is, it's biyah that's receiving from malchus, as he said before, to really break it down. So it does fit what I said before. In other words, these levels. Now, I think in the broadest sense, I think in context of the whole Ayin Beis, I would say misper hakel. Well, it depends on which level. You could start that it's even Esser sphere sagnuzas. The fact you know there's 10 spheres, then they come down after the tzimtzum, the kav, they start taking shape, intensity. Okay, he's talking Atzilus itself here. Fine. Yeah.
Basically saying it's Shtaim Shein Arba, the two that
in a way, yeah. We use that expression, yeah. He said before, first he's just started with Misper Kil. First he just started with you and someone else. When you count it, you value it, you give it to someone else, they're only getting a zecher, simon. Then he said, within you there's also two, and within him there's two. Yeah, basically. Yeah. Klal prat. There's klal kedem prat by the person himself.
First you have to count it, then you get.
No, he said because it's like someone who knows the number. He's told the number before he counts.
Before he starts counting.
Yeah.
So why is he counting? He wants to pay.
It's appreciation of it. It's a breakdown. Doesn't really explain that. He does say. He says clearly. He says clearly. I'm not saying. He says a mashal. Mishu Yedei Kedem. What's the lashon? Kedem shesei sof achadim hu Yedei she's kam misper yud revavos al derech mashal.
You're so used to, but 100,000 is that you wouldn't bother if he gave you a check. The new guy, in it's a chiddush, and he has to go count it.
Right. So he has the call, then he has the prat, right? But then he has the call again.
Not he. Then he tells it to someone else.
But he doesn't have the call again afterwards. No.
He doesn't know. Yeah.
The other person.
It's like klal kedem prat, klal achar prat.
You could count up and see that it's exactly to the original.
Look, some people like to count again and again. Like to make sure. Listen, but techvi was and mein eisen bechos.
So then the other person, he's also told the klal. The other person is also told the klal. He's
told the klal afterwards. That's what he says. He says after he's told the klal that in here I'm giving you 10 cases. In each one there's 10,000.
How does he have a klal?
He begins being mizbein on it. Like I just said. Like I said, a teacher. Yeah, no, he doesn't count the actual original. He counts it in his terms. You'd have to explain that yourself. I mean, he doesn't spell it out all the way, but I would say an example would be like a teacher who gives you a summary of the whole idea, and then you break down the summary, so you're going to get it on a lower level. And this goes many, many levels. This continues to go. It's really the evolution of how something that is completely beyond structure and beyond, a malchus itself, first becomes keich hagvul, and then that gvul slowly emerges. It's really what it's coming down to, is how structure and how definition emerges in the process. This is fascinating because no scientists can only go mamatl ma'ila. You study the world and you try to figure out, so how far can they go? Here he's basically giving you a picture how it goes mamayla mata, how from Agdus comes Ribui. We could only figure out from Ribui to some Agdus. Look, the science is looking for the unified field theory. They don't have the one thing that connects it all. Some say that's God. Yeah, right. So from all the pratim, if you don't know the klal from above, pratim will bring you somewhere, but it's hard to imagine it's going to bring you all the way to the back to the source.
So when we're learning here, we're learning pratim every day. So we had it in the introduction. We got the klal.
100%, yeah. And I could tell you, 1 second, and I go further. The klal as you have it today will be a lot different than a year from now, because as you get more master it, the more. Look, they say short is long. Someone who really masters something can say it very short, very quickly. If you can't say it quickly, I remember 15 years ago, I gave somebody a proposal. He said to me, if you can't put it on one page, you don't get it. I don't want to have 40 pages, Now, it's true, you need the details, but you have to be able to sum it up.
Like Obamacare. Just go for it.
Yeah. In one word. Look, the God did it best. Anon nafshik shavis yehavis anoichi. Aleph. Aleph in one word, and that's it. Look, the shortest mission statement that exists is v'shachanti b'seichem. 2 words. There's no company that has a mission statement of 2 words. Asel migdash v'shachanti b'seichem. Just an example. It's interesting. Or Mashiach tells the Baal Shem Tov, "Yefutzu meinesecha chutza." 3 words. Those 3 words contain everything. So no, it's not. Think about it. It's not so easy to sum up a kavanah that has. I'm not talking about platitudes. I'm talking about a defined objective in very short. You have to really be the top of your. Yeah. I mean, Torah is the master of brevity. Things in 1 word, 2 words. Because Hebrew in general is a metaphorical language. A word is a story. In English, I don't know if you study languages, English is a descriptive language. 1 word in Hebrew needs a sentence in English and 5 sentences in French, by the way.
What about Chinese?
I don't know. Chinese is more Hebrew-like. It's symbolic. That's why there's, I think, 2,000 keys on a Chinese typewriter. You know that?
There's actually 50,000 symbols.
You can't have typewriters. The big typewriters like that. It's because they speak but Hebrew only has 22 letters. They have many more than that. Now Hebrew is definitely, there's no question. In all the studies, linguistics, Hebrew is the concise, the word. Everything has a shadish, 3 letters. It's an absolutely unique language. And that words have meaning. Like when you say A, B, C means nothing. Aleph, Beis, Gimel means, and ABC comes from Aleph, Beis, Gimel. Because this again is an example of diminishing. As it diminishes, it just becomes quantity without quality. A Hebrew letter has both quantity and quality. It has.
You can get to a cloud from it. If you take Chinese, you'll never get to a cloud. It'll be over.
I don't know Chinese, but yeah.
You got 50,000 separate symbols. It's like 50,000.
Brevity is the key thing. You're able to sum up. Like I would sum up Ayin Beis as interface. 100%. It's about the interface. And other Hamshechim and not. Samach Vov is not about the interface. It's about Veda B'Kei Chatzmei or whatever.
But when it's talent on one foot, so don't do it to others.
Yeah, that's another example. Shammai couldn't do that. Yeah. Okay, so let's continue. I'm concerned. Huh? Let me see where it goes. If it's a completely new subject matter. But one more line, I think that Ve'inyan Ribui Hakelim the malchus Yudur Shazel Derech Moshla Hadibur, and the Ribui Hakelim, the magnitude, the number, the what's it called, the quantity of containers, magnitude of the quantity. In Atzilus, it's known that that's an example for Dibur. Shabab Ribui Eisis Lega Machshava Va'eru B'miut. The malchus like Dibur is that it brings many letters. It comes into many oisius, many words, many letters, compared to thought, and the energy, meaning the intensity of the idea, is diminished. This is, if you remember, you go back in the mashal, he said the same thing. He said that, if you remember, the difference between the klal, what did he say? He said by machshav and dibur, he said, the klal and prat by the person himself. So the klal is like machshava, and dibur is where it breaks it down into details. But here he's saying it, no, he was saying it in malchus. Okay, in a lower level. There it's even by the person himself. When you count, it's more details of machshava. He's saying in malchus also, dibur is malchus, that you break it down. So basically, malchus is like, you'd say the before malchus is like machshava. We have more intensity, definitely, but you don't have a break. Before he said klal and prat it was in the person himself. Now he's saying that malchus is like dibur, that spells out, malchus spells out what is the machshava, that we have a machshava in the higher 9 spheres.
Before dibur, but it's not before malchus.
Malchus represents dibur.
Right.
With the keli must.
Yeah, I think we should stop here. It's a new subject.
There's 3 revolutions for malchus.
Yeah, it's a new subject matter. I mean, it's omnum, he says, in Baveda. Okay. So let's, okay, we're going to stop here. So we did the beginning, we stopped here. We did the beginning of chapter 86, page 163, top of 164.
He says like